David Chen made $240,000 a year, and he was $300 away from a bounce check. Not because he lost his job, not because of some medical emergency, not because the market crashed. David was a senior engineer at a company you've definitely heard of. He had 2 degrees, a 6-figure salary before he turned 30, and a mind sharp enough to solve problems most people couldn't even understand. And yet, on a Tuesday night in March, he sat at his kitchen table staring at a banking app, doing math he already knew the answer to, hoping the numbers would somehow change if he refreshed the page one more time. They didn't. Somewhere between the promotion and the panic, something had gone quietly, invisibly wrong. And the strange part is this: David isn't rare. He's the norm. Because being smart with numbers and being smart with money turn out to be 2 almost unrelated skills. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why the most educated, highest-earning people you know might be one emergency away from a very expensive wake-up call, and what you can do right now to make sure you're not one of them. David grew up believing that if he worked hard and got good grades, money would take care of itself. And for a while it seemed to. He got the job. He got the raise. He got the promotion at 28 that most people don't see until their 40s. His parents were proud. His friends assumed he had it figured out. What none of them saw was the $400 car payment, the credit card balance that never quite hit zero, the apartment that cost more than it should because it was 5 minutes closer to the office, and the quiet, constant feeling that he was still, somehow, behind. I'm John, and if you're enjoying documentaries that break down complex business, money, investing, and psychology into practical lessons you can actually use, subscribe to John Explains Money. I post documentaries every week designed to help you build wealth, avoid costly financial mistakes, and make smarter financial decisions. Now, let's continue. Here's what almost nobody tells people like David. Intelligence helps you earn. It doesn't automatically help you keep. Those are 2 completely different systems running in the brain, and understanding the difference is the entire key to this documentary. Every time David got a raise, something happened that behavioral economists have studied for decades. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it's almost invisible while it's happening. The new salary arrives, and within weeks, spending quietly rises to meet it. Not because David suddenly became reckless, but because his brain adjusted to what felt normal. A better apartment didn't feel like an indulgence anymore. It felt like something he'd earned, something he deserved after years of effort. This is tied to a concept psychologists call hedonic adaptation, our tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of satisfaction no matter how much our circumstances improve. The bigger apartment felt exciting for exactly 1 month. Then it just felt normal. And normal doesn't feel like something you should sacrifice to save. This is why so many high earners feel broke even while making more money than most of the country. Their lifestyle rises exactly as fast as their income, sometimes faster, and the gap between what they earn and what they spend never actually widens. Meanwhile, someone earning half of what David makes, but living 2 years behind their raises instead of racing to meet them, quietly builds more wealth in a decade than David does in 20 years. Wealth isn't built by what you earn. It's built by the size of the gap you protect between earning and spending. That gap is everything. But income only explains part of David's story. The bigger issue was happening somewhere psychologists call present bias. Our brain's tendency to overvalue immediate rewards and undervalue future ones, even when we know better. David knew, intellectually, that maxing out his 401k mattered. He knew compound growth rewarded people who started early. He'd read the articles. He understood the math. But knowing something and feeling something are not the same thing. The dinner tonight, the upgraded flight, the new phone, all of it felt real and immediate. Retirement in 30 years felt like a rumor about someone else's life. This is why financial literacy alone doesn't fix behavior. You can know exactly what you should do and still do the opposite, because the part of your brain making spending decisions in the moment isn't reasoning with logic, it's reasoning with feeling. There's another force working against David, one that explains why losing money hurts so much more than gaining money feels good. It's called loss aversion, and it's one of the most well-documented patterns in behavioral finance. Losing $100 creates roughly twice the emotional pain that gaining $100 creates in pleasure. This sounds harmless until you realize what it does to investing behavior. David watched his portfolio dip during a rough month in the market, and the discomfort was so intense that he pulled his money into cash, promising himself he'd get back in once things calmed down. They calmed down. He never got back in at the right time. That single decision, driven purely by emotional pain rather than financial logic, cost him more over the following 3 years than almost anything else in this story. Wealthy, financially disciplined people aren't immune to this fear. They've simply trained themselves to recognize it as a feeling, not a signal, and to keep their long-term strategy running underneath the noise. Then there's the trap almost nobody names correctly: mental accounting. David treated his bonus differently than his regular paycheck. The paycheck was for bills. The bonus in his mind was for living a little. Money is money, mathematically. But psychologically, we build separate mental folders for it, and money labeled fun somehow always finds a way to be spent on fun. This is the same reason people carry credit card debt at 20% interest while keeping a savings account earning almost nothing. In their mind, those are two unrelated accounts, protected from each other, when in reality, paying down that debt would be the single highest return investment available to them. The mind separates money into categories that don't exist anywhere except inside our own heads, and those categories quietly sabotage decisions that would otherwise be obvious. Social comparison made all of this worse. David wasn't trying to show off. He didn't think of himself as materialistic, but his friend group had a certain rhythm to it. Certain restaurants, certain vacations, certain unspoken expectations, and falling out of step with that rhythm felt like falling behind in life itself. This is status signaling, and it's rarely about greed. It's about belonging. Humans are wired to monitor their position within a group, and spending becomes one of the fastest, most visible ways to signal that you still belong. The tragedy is that almost everyone in that friend group was doing the same performance for each other, each one assuming everyone else had it figured out, none of them realizing they were all quietly drowning in similar debt while smiling in the same photos. By the time David sat at that kitchen table doing math, he already knew something had shifted. Watching his numbers not add up for the first time made the abstract concrete. This is what psychologists call a moment of forced recognition, when the gap between belief and reality becomes too large to ignore. And what David did next is the actual turning point of this story, because it wasn't dramatic. He didn't quit his job. He didn't sell his car in some viral moment of extreme minimalism. He did something quieter and far more powerful. He automated his savings before he ever saw the money, redirecting a percentage of every paycheck into his 401k and a Roth IRA before it ever touched his checking account. This single change works because it removes the decision entirely from the moment of temptation. You cannot spend money you never see, and the psychological battle against present bias becomes unnecessary when the fight never has to happen in the first place. He also did something almost embarrassingly simple. He waited 24 hours before any purchase over $100. Not because he suddenly developed superhuman willpower, but because he understood that the emotional urgency behind most purchases fades dramatically within a single day. What feels essential at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday almost never feels essential the following morning. This tiny rule quietly eliminated most of his impulse spending without requiring constant, exhausting self-control. Because willpower, researchers have found, behaves less like a character trait and more like a battery that drains throughout the day. This is decision fatigue, and it's why so many financial mistakes happen in the evening, after a full day of decisions has already worn the mind down. David stopped fighting his own exhaustion and started designing around it instead. The last shift was the hardest because it required David to change how he measured success. For years, his sense of progress was tied to what he could show: the car, the apartment, the vacation photos. Wealthy households, the kind that actually build lasting financial security, tend to measure progress differently. They track net worth, not lifestyle. They look at what they own free and clear, minus what they owe, and they watch that single number climb year over year, regardless of what their neighbors are doing. This single mental shift, from visible spending to invisible net worth, is one of the most reliable differences between people who look wealthy and people who actually are. David still works the same job. He still lives in a nice apartment, drives a decent car, and enjoys his life. Nothing about his lifestyle looks dramatically different from the outside. But 2 years after that night at the kitchen table, his retirement accounts had grown by more than his entire annual salary, his credit card balance sat permanently at zero, and for the first time in his adult life, an unexpected expense didn't feel like an emergency. It felt like a Tuesday. The uncomfortable truth this documentary keeps circling back to is this: being smart doesn't protect you from financial mistakes, because money isn't a math problem. It's a psychology problem wearing a math costume. The people who win aren't the ones with the highest IQ or the biggest paycheck. They're the ones who understand their own minds well enough to build systems that work even when willpower doesn't, even when emotions take over, even on the Tuesdays when refreshing the banking app one more time feels like the only option left. David didn't get richer by getting smarter. He got richer by getting honest about how his brain actually worked, and then building a life that worked with it instead of against it.